So this is Analytics with Asa. Today I'm joined by ESPN Bet data scientist and my good friend Tej Seth. Tej, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on again. I always love coming on this show. And I was thinking about this right before we started recording, but I think you're probably at least top five, but maybe even higher than that of like chefs who also have football podcasts. Like some of the food that you've been putting out there on Twitter has been fantastic to look at. So I'm sure it's also tasting great too.
Thank you, man. I feel honored. So today I'm really excited to have Tej on because while we do have some football to discuss, more importantly, the Oscars were this Sunday. And so I figured a cool way to kind of start today's episode is to talk about if you could pick any movie that would win Best Picture, and not just this year, but all time, what would be your pick for Best Picture? Or in other words, what's your favorite movie?
Yeah, so I have two favorite movies. Like one is more of an Indian movie, and then one is more of a popular one that we watch here in America. And so the one that I like from the Indian side of things is called RRR, like it's just the letter three times. And I love this movie because it's really about like a friend, an unexpected friendship. And there's like different parts to it where it follows different characters, and you see a lot of different parts of India in the movie, and learn a lot about the history of what India looked like. I think it was like set like 100 years ago. So it's a very, very fun movie to watch, and definitely something that I like to show a lot of my friends who haven't seen it. So that's my favorite Indian movie there for sure. And then my favorite like American movie, like I don't know if this would win Best Picture, but like the movie that I always watch whenever whenever I want to just like be in a good mood is Superbad because like I think it's just like such a funny comedy movie. And it's one of those movies that like no matter how many times you watch it, you'll like find yourself laughing at all the jokes. And so those are kind of like the two movies that I've probably seen like a double digit amount of times.
No, those are great picks. I have not seen RRR, but I have heard that Bollywood has put out like more movies per year than Hollywood has. And I find that really interesting that there's this like giant film industry that a lot of Americans, including myself, are not really well versed in. But I think that's a cool pick. And then for Superbad, I think like you can judge a comedy by how many quotes people can just memorize. And there are so many in that movie. And that just kind of speaks to how well written it is. And it's kind of dumb fun, but dumb fun is still fun. And yeah, that's a great movie. I'd probably say for my pick, this is a little bit more of like a highbrow one, but I'm kind of wearing the shirt now, but it's 2001: A Space Odyssey. So it came out, I think it was 68 or 69, but it was Stanley Kubrick's big space movie, and there's a lot of questions that you'll have at the end of the movie, but it is really, really cool. And Stanley Kubrick did such a good job directing the movie that there are some conspiracy theories that he actually directed the moon landing, which if I'm a director, that might be like the biggest compliment ever. But yeah, so that I think was a cool start. But to transition the Oscar talk a little bit to football, I wanted to ask you, let's pretend you're the football academy. So you are going to assign these awards, and let's start with the best costume design. So which NFL team do you think has the best costume design? Or in other words, which ones do you think have the best uniforms?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this one. And I ended up with the Chargers just overall uniforms. Like the different colors that they have, I think are fantastic. And like I think it's partly because of sometimes the lighting in SoFi Stadium, like making it look really good on TV. But I think just even as like a standalone, the Chargers uniforms are like really, really good with like how they have the sideways lightning bolt, running down the pants, and then just like the color aesthetics that they choose and how everything complements each other. Like definitely my favorite uniforms to look at in the league.
Yeah, those are great picks. Yeah, the Chargers with that kind of powder blue mixed with the yellow. It's just, it's a really good combo. And I want to be biased and say that the Vikings are one of my favorites, but to kind of take the bias out of that, I think the Bengals have pretty cool uniforms with the orange, but there's a lot of really cool uniforms out there. I'd probably say the Chargers do take the cake, though, especially when they switch to that more powder blue look. I think that's a great look for them. So Next award, and congratulations to the Chargers on the best costume design. Next award, we have best screenplay. And I guess there were two ways of interpreting this, because in football, there is really a screenplay. But to make it a little bit more broad, how about the best screenplay would be the best play calling game from a coach? So who do you think did the best job in a single game in play calling?
Yeah, if it was a specific screen, I'd have to like comb through Sean Payton, Saints film to find a really good one, because I always thought he did a great job there. But yeah, I thought like what Matt LaFleur did with Malik Willis this year, from like a play caller's perspective, I thought was like amazing. Like we saw so many other play callers around the league struggle when they went from their starting quarterback to their backup quarterback, which is expected, right? Like that's why you have a starter and a backup. But for the Packers offense to not really miss a beat when they went from Love to Willis was such a good job by Matt LaFleur in Green Bay, where the Tennessee game in particular, where you have a quarterback like Malik Willis who showed up on your team like just a couple of weeks before the season started. He's someone who hasn't been efficient at all in the NFL, and to get a 30-point performance, out of him in that Tennessee game, I thought was like such a good job. Like some of the plays that they used to get like easy completions for him, and the run game concepts, where they're doing a lot of creative stuff with how they use Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson as well in that game, was like, it was very fun to watch as a neutral observer.
Yeah, no, that was just a great performance by him. And what was so cool is that despite scoring all those points, it was in such a unique way, because typically, I mean, teams get run heavy, but maybe not that run heavy. And Malik Willis is a great runner of the football, and they really did a good job of kind of utilizing that. It almost felt like watching Army, but applicable to the NFL. And so I thought that was like a great performance, or a great writing performance by Matt LaFleur. So let's move on to the next award, and congratulations to Matt LaFleur. Next up, we have Best Director. So for, I think, most situations, the director of a team would probably be the coach. So over the course of the year, who do you think did the best job directing their team? Who deserves this Best Director award?
I have to go with your guy, Kevin O'Connell here. Like
Great pick.
the fact that Sam Darnold was a career backup, after starting briefly with the Jets, and that Kevin O'Connell had the Vikings in a situation where they were playing for the 1 seed, in the last game of the regular season, was like such an insanely good coaching job. And I really like how, O'Connell was doing as a play caller. Like when he would notice Darnold would get a little bit frantic, he would just like start spamming play action, and that would really help Darnold settle down. Getting just manufactured targets to Justin Jefferson is usually a very good thing for an offense. Having like a secondary receiver like Jalen Naylor have some like really explosive plays was nice. Working TJ Hawkinson into the mix later in the season, and then on the defensive end, like being able to get the right players in for Brian Flores to run his ideal version of the defense. And I'm sure like the practices between O'Connell and Flores, as offensive and defensive play callers respectively, are like so much fun to watch, because they're all doing like such unique stuff on their sides of the ball. So just like having control over all of that, and being able to get the Vikings team to where they were with a quarterback who wouldn't be ranked in the top 15 or 20 in most quarterback lists, was like such an impressive job to me this season.
Yeah, they say in Hollywood there's two types of directors. There's the ones who expect their actors to orchestrate everything perfectly, and there's the ones that let their actors kind of spontaneously come up with new things. And I think O'Connell, in a way, did a good job of balancing both, because obviously he did great job play calling. I would probably categorize like Ben Johnson as the guy who expects his actors to do everything the way he wrote things up. But O'Connell, I think, was great at playing on the strengths of Darnold. And Darnold had a great deep ball, and he really utilized that this offseason. And so I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in the future with J.J. McCarthy. Congratulations to Kevin O'Connell on winning the Best Director award. Next up, we have the Best Supporting Actor. So the way I kind of categorize this award is it's the second best player in the league. So the best player who isn't the best player on their own team. So who did you have as the best supporting actor in this year's Tej Seth Awards?
Yeah, I had to go with the Super Bowl champions here. And I think with the playoff run that Saquon Barkley had and just like the season he had in general, he's probably considered the best player on the Eagles right now. And I do think that their entire offensive line should get like a shout out for how well they played this year as well in both like the run and the pass game. And I think that the leader of that right now is Jordan Mailata at left tackle for them. Like he was always a really good run blocker. I had thought throughout his career. This year, he like really took a step up with his pass protection and just made things much more comfortable for Jalen Hurts to have 2.5, 3, 4 seconds sometimes to throw and find his receivers downfield. And you just think about like some of the major blocks that Jordan Mailata had throughout the season to open up holes for Saquon to run through, especially like in that Rams game where, they weren't able to do much through the air. So it really was dependent on the run game and the entire offensive line, including Mailata, ended up delivering. So definitely thought that he is the best supporting actor here of the season.
Yeah, and for the Eagles specifically, there's so many guys you could have picked. AJ Brown had kind of a mid-tier year, but he's a really important part of that offense. Jalen Hurts being the quarterback, Lane Johnson allowing like almost a league low in pressures, but Jordan Mailata being the left tackle is kind of the anchor of that whole system. And this is a little bit non-football related, but I don't know if you've ever heard that man sing. I'm assuming if he's winning this award, there has to be some sort of musical component as well, because that man can really sing.
I have seen the videos of that. It's very impressive for him to be like basically a multi-sport athlete there, right? With how well he's able to play left tackle and sing. Yeah.
All right. Well, congratulations to Jordan Mailata. So next up, our second to last award, we have the best actor. And the actor in this case is going to be player. So essentially, who was your MVP on the year?
I know there was a huge debate between Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen, and I really think you could have gone either way in this argument, but I ended up going with Josh Allen, and it's very close to me, but the reason why I ended up picking him is because when you look at who Lamar was throwing to this year, Zay Flowers is awesome. Rashad Bateman was really good this year. Mark Andrews, for the most part, was good. You Derrick Henry in the backfield, having some gravity of his own. And there were just like so many weapons for Lamar to leverage and to create such high-end output on offense. But on Josh Allen's side, like, yes, the offensive line was better for the Bills than it was for the Ravens. But like outside of Khalil Shakir, there wasn't a like true second pass catcher that you could trust on the Bills this year. So for Allen to still have very similar stats in terms of how well he was doing from like a run and pass point was very impressive to me. And then really what it came down to is when you look at expected points added or EPA, like they both don't take sacks that much. They both pass the ball efficiently. But like when Allen was running with the ball, his ball security was just a lot better than Lamar's. And Lamar's EPA got dinged because of that. And so that was kind of what tipped me towards Allen. But yeah, very, very close discussion there between the two of them. But Josh Allen was the best actor for me this year.
I think that's a great pick. And I'm sure there was that stat out there about Lamar Jackson's receivers being one of the highest in terms of like openness rating. And I'm sure a lot of that was also just a product of the way the offense was designed, but it still kind of just speaks to how much better his receivers were than the Bills receivers. And Josh Allen was really like a one-man show in that regard because Khalil Shakir had a pretty good season, no doubt, but a lot of that was just Josh Allen making something happen. And that was really impressive on his end. I think there's a chance as well that this is almost one of those Leonardo DiCaprio situations where they end up picking him because they feel bad about not picking him so many other times in the past. But yeah, he had a great season, MVP really well deserved. So finally, we have what most people consider the most important Oscar, and that is the Best Picture. And the way I categorize this award is what was your game of the year? So what was absolute cinema, as some people will say?
I mean, there are definitely a lot of great games this year to choose from, but the one that like I know I'll probably like watch the highlights of a couple times this summer when I'm like really missing football is Ravens Bengals, the Thursday night football game. Just like the back and forth between Lamar and Joe Burrow and the different weapons that they had on the team, and like the drama at the end of the game of what it ended up coming down to with the Bengals going for two, and being able to like watch that play and seeing how big it was at that moment, and like what this game meant from like a AFC playoff picture perspective. Just like it was so much fun to watch. It was like the perfect Thursday night game to have on. And, you were just like, it was just like hard to sleep after that game, because like there's so many fireworks in it that it definitely kept me up for a while, because I was just like thinking over everything that had happened in that matchup.
Yeah, almost any time you pair two like perennial AFC quarterbacks against each other, you're going to get like amazing games. And we've seen that time and time throughout in the past year and the year before that. But when you have a guy like Lamar who's just so much fun to watch, you have Joe Burrow who's so fun to watch, and they both have really good weapons. It's always a good time watching the AFC. And I mean, good for Amazon, because they finally got like great games. And Sam Schwartenstein did just a great job
Yes.
of like making the game really cool with the Prime Vision, and just the fact that it was able to actually have a good game to use that was really cool on Amazon's end and on the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that is like a great point, because oh, sorry, I was saying that,
no, go ahead,
that's a great point, because like, yeah, because the first 2 years of the first 2 years of the Amazon contract was like rough in terms of the Thursday night games. So for this year to have like a ton of great games, including the one that we just talked about, was huge.
Absolutely. So you were at the combine. So there was a lot going on at that time. Who was your biggest standouts in watching all of the drill participations, the athletic testing? Were there some big risers in your big board?
So the one that I think is pretty obvious, based on following the combine, was Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, where he's been a very polarizing draft prospect, because all the measurables and the tools are there, but the production wasn't there. And so, I'm very curious to see where he ends up getting drafted. But in terms of like how well he did at the combine, it ended up being almost like a 100th percentile performance, because like he was just able to do like all the drills well. His height, weight, speed like showed up really well. So he was definitely like the biggest winner out of the combine for me.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the chart, but they were talking about the athletic measurables, and he was almost identical to Myles Garrett in every athletic measurable. And then they just show the sack discrepancy in college. And I thought that was really funny, because he's just a freak athlete in a similar way that Myles Garrett is. But the production just wasn't there, like you mentioned. And teams tend to, I think, draft, especially edge rushers, based more on their traits than on their production. So I'm expecting him to go top 15, top 10 overall, just because of how good of a combine that he had. But yeah, there is a little bit of concern with the fact that he just did not get a lot of sacks in his time at South Carolina. But yeah, it's still, or Texas A&M, but really, really good prospect. So would not be surprised to see him go high. Did you have anyone else that was someone who really raised their stock?
Yeah, not 100%. I think is how it's pronounced, from I think he had like a 43-inch vertical jump, 11.5-foot broad jump, and then ran like a 4.38 40. And so he at 220 pounds. So just like a very athletic guy, someone that definitely will shoot up the draft boards because of the performance that he put on. And, for him to be able to run like sub 4.4 at like 20-30 pounds heavier than the players that we usually see run in that speed is like super impressive to me.
Yeah, I think Trevor Sycamore put it best, that the NFL loves aliens, and he's certainly an alien. If you want to make him be like a full-time safety, that's fine. If you want to put him almost at like this linebacker safety hybrid, I think a team would be interested in that as well. But yeah, he's definitely someone that raised his draft stock quite a bit. So looking at the course of the entire combine and looking at all the participants and the way that the players ended up looking, were there any macro level trends that you noticed in player makeup, their builds, their archetypes that we saw this year we might not have seen as often in previous years?
Yeah, the one that I thought was like very significant to me was just like how athletic some of these defensive linemen are this year. We talked about Stewart. There are a lot of other defensive linemen that showed up, really well. And you brought up a great point of like edge rushers are often drafted off of their traits over their production, and that seems to be valued more for them. And that's how you end up with Trevon Walker, who was like another combine freak going number 1 overall a couple of years ago. So that was something interesting. And then another thing was like the heavier running backs was also something that I was keeping my eye on, because I've written about and talked about before how it's very hard to survive in the NFL as an under 200-pound running back. Just because of durability and not being able to break tackles and like you might have been able to in college if you were at that weight. And so for these running backs for almost all of them to be over 200 pounds is very notable to me, because that at least means that if a team has a rule that they don't draft running backs under 200 pounds, like they won't be crossing off any running backs off their board because of that.
Yeah, and what I find so fascinating about that is despite these running backs being heavier on average, we still saw faster running backs on average. There's a lot of these guys that ran like sub 4.5 40 times. And I know you've written about it that athletic testing isn't quite as important for running backs, but I'm sure there are some standards that teams have in terms of you have to hit this 40 time in order for me to really want to draft you. And I just thought it was really impressive that despite having heavier running backs, we still saw a lot of running backs that were much faster than we anticipated. So definitely have some teams salivating on an already really loaded running back draft class. But yeah, I think that was a great breakdown there. So next up, we have the franchise tag deadline that occurred on Tuesday. So there was a lot of drama surrounding that, but just to go over a few of the notable transactions that occurred, T. Higgins was franchise tagged for 1 year. I believe it was $26 million because he was franchise tagged the previous year. We had Osa Odigizua, who did not receive the franchise tag. There was a report suggesting he might have, but he was actually extended prior to that deadline. 4 years, $80 million, $57 million guaranteed. And then finally, we had Trey Smith, who did receive the franchise tag for the Kansas City Chiefs. So was there anything notable in that regard for those players that ended up receiving the franchise tag?
Yeah, I mean, we've made fun of a lot of the Cowboys roster building decisions in the past couple of years, but like I thought they killed it with Osa's contract here, where he's not even in the top 10 in terms of defensive tackle average per year, and like he's a good player who doesn't miss games. Like he's like really what you want out of a defensive tackle in the NFL. And so for them to get this type of deal with him, where he probably could have made more on the open market, but took maybe a little bit of a hometown discount to return to the Cowboys. Like very great job by their front office to get that deal. And then the thing that did surprise me was Trey Smith getting franchise tagged, and then the subsequent Joe Thuney trade that just happened. Like, it does make some sense from the Chiefs' perspective why you would want to keep the younger offensive guard who's really good and trade the older one and kind of rework your offensive line this offseason. So now that that's played out, that it does make a little bit of sense to me. But to have that much money tied up in Trey Smith, and then you have the Creed Humphrey contract as well, and you're still like needing to open up the checkbook to figure out your offensive tackle situation. Like that's something I'm very curious to see what Brett Veach does the rest of the offseason with how he's going to address his offensive line.
Yeah, and as long as you have Mahomes, things are going to be okay. But I think you bring up a really interesting point that you're investing all this money on the interior, and you really still have really significant question marks at your tackle position. And tackle typically is a lot more important. But yeah, whenever you're franchise tagging a guy at over $20 million a year for just one position, and that position is not considered a premium one, it's going to really make things interesting to see what they end up doing, because Trey Smith was a really solid guard. He had a little bit of flaws, but he was definitely going to be the highest paid guard in the NFL if he was not franchise tagged. But what's so interesting about the franchise tag is you kind of keep everything ironclad whenever it's just a 1 year deal. And so there may have to be some maneuvering the Chiefs have to do to fix that offensive line situation financially. But yeah, I mean, it's good to keep your guy, but Yeah, I also completely agree with you about the Osa Odigizua extension. Typically, the Cowboys are the team that comes late to the party and has to pay a lot more as a result. This is like a rare example where they came early and it actually ended up benefiting them because they paid a little bit less than anticipated market value. So good for them. But to transition a bit onto the notable untagged free agents, we had Jevon Holland, the safety for the Dolphins. He was not franchise tagged. And I think most of that was a financial decision. The Dolphins are paying a lot of guys a lot of money, and they can't really afford to just spend that money right away. But probably the most notable one, and this is one we can kind of spend some time on, is Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold was not franchise tagged. I know there's a lot of anticipation that he was going to get tagged and traded, but considering that did not happen, were you surprised at all?
Yeah, I ended up not being surprised by the Sam Darnold, or Sam Darnold not getting franchise tag. Like, I think if you asked me that same question after the Packers game in Week 16, I would have been shocked that Sam Darnold wasn't at least coming back to the Vikings. Obviously the last two games went so poorly for him, where they probably ended up deciding to go in a different direction. But I do think this is probably the right thing for the Vikings to do. Like, Sam Darnold will get a pretty decent contract on the open market. You can get a third round comp pick out of it as long as you kind of end up not canceling it out with some of the moves that you make in free agency. And you brought JJ McCarthy up earlier. Like, based on how we looked in the preseason, the type of prospect that he was coming out of college, and the infrastructure that you have in place, like, it does make everyone feel confident that McCarthy is walking into a situation where he has really good weapons. He has a good play caller. He has really good offensive tackle play, and like those types of things that can really help these young quarterbacks. And we'll probably see that play out with McCarthy, and it'll be a lot cheaper than Darnold either playing on the tag or getting tagged and traded. From the Vikings perspective.
Yeah, I am not surprised at all that the Vikings didn't tag him with the intent to play him. I think there were a lot of Vikings fans that anticipated Kwesi being able to kind of thread this needle and tag him, trade him to another team. But what was so interesting is that apparently the market was not that high on Darnold. And I want to ask you this. Do you think the market is just kind of pretending that they're not that high in order to not have to pay that franchise tag price? Or do you think they're really just not that interested in him, given how poor the last two games went for him?
Definitely think it's a combination of both. Where it's a lot of the former of not wanting to pay the franchise tag price on top of the trade compensation that these teams would have also had to send to the Vikings. But also, I do think that his value dropped a lot in those last two games because even though he played decent for large parts of the season, like it's hard to get that taste out of your mouth of just like how poorly he played in the last two games of the year, for the Vikings. So like I do think that some team will want to give him a Baker Geno Smith type deal, that's adjusted for the cap. Just because he's shown talent. Like there are a lot of teams that need quarterbacks out there and might not want to go through the Aaron Rodgers experience or try to like dip into this draft that's known as a weaker draft class for quarterbacks. So there should be some market for him, but probably not at the trade comp plus franchise tag value.
Yeah, there's a lot more we could talk about that's gone down over the past few days, but I think I want to cover the macro level implications of what's happened with this franchise tag deadline. And that is, I think, first, the quarterback market is still not great, but it's definitely better with Darnold actually being in the mix. I guess you have Aaron Rodgers, you have Darnold, and then you have probably a steep drop off and maybe Russell Wilson next up, but definitely not a very strong year free agent wise. But as you say, there's not really a great guarantee that the draft class is going to be really loaded with quarterbacks either. And so I really do anticipate Darnold signing for quite a bit of money, probably like you mentioned with that Baker Geno level contract with cap inflation adjustments. But another thing to note is that the wide receiver and defensive tackle market lose their top two guys. But what was so interesting is they gain another top guy with Davante Adams. So we will talk about that in a bit, but let's cover what may be your free agency dream matchups. So this is a player who is currently in free agency, whether that be their contract expires or they got cut, that you would like to see paired up with another team. So who is your first free agency dream matchup?
Yeah, the first one that came to mind for me is Jevon Holland to the Jets. And I was looking over some our lads rosters today, and I noticed like the Jets are losing a lot of their defensive back talent. Both of their safeties and Chuck Clark and Jalen Mills, walking DJ Reed as well, Isaiah Oliver at their nickel, like all free agents. So I don't know which ones of those they'll end up bringing back, but I think for Aaron Glenn, like getting to the Jets and like having a versatile safety that is playing at a very high level in Jevon Holland, like I think would be really cool for him to have there, because I really saw in Detroit with when Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch started to play really well together at their respective safety positions, like how that really opened up Aaron Glenn to really get into a lot of his unique blitz packages, because he felt more confident about the talent that he had in the back seven. So I think that for him to go to the Jets would be a very cool signing for them.
Yeah, and we just saw that defense improve so much when they actually had a competent secondary. And the season before last, they really did not have that in the slightest, the lines with Aaron Glenn. And whenever they actually have the personnel to be able to play strict man-to-man coverage, we saw how effective that was with their play against the Vikings the last game, where he ran man coverage almost every play, and it was immensely successful. And whenever you have a versatile guy like that, just you were able to do that. And you already have Sauce Gardner, who's a perennial cornerback. And yeah, I think that would be a great pairing. So one guy that really came to mind for me, and this is more of kind of a wishful thinking, but Milton Williams is now the top dog in terms of defensive tackle free agents. And I would love to see him with the Vikings. And I'm not saying that just as a Vikings fan, I'm saying that as a football fan as well, because the Vikings historically have not had a lot of luck at the interior spot when it comes to actually generating pressure. So my projection is that he's going to get probably a little bit north of Osa's contract in terms of dollars per year. But just to talk about him a little bit, he was fourth in pass rush win rate among all defensive tackles, 17.6%, which was really, really high. I do think the fact that he was a part-time player and he played on such a dominant defensive line, it could mean it's going to go down a little bit, but I still think that's a lot better with what the Vikings are working with, because the Vikings have not had a single person exceed 10% this season. And that just says a lot that when you have really good edge rushers like Andrew Van Ginkel and like Jonathan Grenard, and you pair him up with an actual good, like penetrating interior defensive tackle, then things could start looking really, really good. And Eric Eager did a study on that with interior pass rush being worth negative 0.275 EPA per play, which is really, really good for the team. And so I would really like to see Milton Williams on the Vikings, not just as a fan of the Vikings, but also as a fan of football.
That's a great one, because like, yeah, I mean, that is like the piece that's missing from the Vikings defense right now. I feel like is a strong interior defensive line presence, and so getting someone like Milton Williams in there would be great. And yeah, I'm sure he's just really thinking about like the amount of money that he's going to make in free agency here, because he's about to become a very rich man from in the next couple of weeks.
No, absolutely. So who was your next dream pairing for a team with a free agent?
Going into the wide receivers here, and you brought him up earlier, and it's Davante Adams to the Chargers. And like, I really think like we all knew this coming into the year last year. We saw it mostly play out in the season. It's like Chargers are a pretty decent football team that is like just really missing pass catching talent. And so for Davante Adams to be a free agent and to be someone who could fit really well in what they already have there with Ladd McConkey playing in the slot would be really exciting to me. Like you look at Davante Adams' advanced tracking data, and he still has a 77th percentile open score at this stage in his career. So he's still really good at separating. His catch score and his yards after catch scores have dropped a decent amount from peak Davante Adams, but like just someone who is able to separate and make defenses not only focus on Ladd McConkey, I think will be crucial. I'm sure that they'll draft someone within the first 3 rounds to help them out at pass catcher, but I just think that Adams would be such a good fit with the Chargers, and I think that Herbert would have a great time throwing to someone like him that's still able to generate as much separation as he's able to.
Yeah, I think if that happens, Herbert has got to be so happy because Ladd McConkey had an incredible rookie season, and I'm expecting him to maybe take a step up from there. But when Ladd McConkey is your only guy, it's just got to be so frustrating. And I think a 70, 80 percentile Davante Adams is significantly better than any of the other wide receivers that were with the Chargers. And considering that Josh Palmer is going to be a free agent, you may even lose your next guy up. And so, yeah, you're going to need a guy like Davante Adams if you expect to take that next step up. And we really saw the issues that represented in the playoffs, where I think Ladd McConkey had like 80% or so many receiving yards and no one else had anything else. And so I'd really like to see that, especially because Davante Adams is someone who has not been a part of a competitive team in a few years now. And I kind of feel bad for the guy. Like, I hope the Chargers end up signing him. I think that'd be a great pairing. So next up, we have what I think is my dream scenario for the Houston Texans. So they've had a lot of offensive line struggles. And so I think the guy that could potentially shore that up would be Will Fries, or I think Will Fries is the way to pronounce it. His over the cap projection is 4 years, $57 million. And the Texans are not really high in cap space right now. So I do think there may be a little bit of restructuring that may be required for this to really happen. But he was someone who was rock solid last year before he went down with injury, but 87 overall PFF grade. He had an 85 run blocking grade. And over the course of the 5 games he was healthy, he only allowed 6 pressures, which is not amazing, but I think that's a big step up from what they had last season. And like pressures were just really a big part of why the team was not that successful last year. Stroud faced 249 pressures last season, and 117 of which came from the interior. And the guys that they had at the interior was Juice Scruggs, Shaq Mason, and these guys just were not that great last season. And so I think you really solve the issues that presented that team. And another aspect of that as well is the run blocking. So yeah, the Texans averaged negative 0.9 EPA per rush last season. And I think Joe Mixon looks fine. Like, he looks like a good running back. He had some really good highlight plays last season, but the offensive line was just so bad that he was not really able to do much for that. And just to kind of add the cherry on top, Nick Caley is the new offensive coordinator, and he comes from the McVay tree. And so they're a pretty run-heavy style, and typically they lean on 11 personnel. And because of that, you can't really rely on your 2 tight end sets to generate that run blocking. So I think Will Fries would be a great pairing for the Texans.
Yeah, that's like a really good one. Like those stats that you mentioned about how often Stroud was pressured, and also just like the quick pressures. Like, when I looked at it, like how often quarterbacks were pressured in under 2.5 seconds, like Houston was the second most last year. And so just to get like up to like decent guard play would go a long way for them. And so that's like a really good shout.
Mm-hmm. So who is your next and final pairing for players and teams?
Yes, I got another receiver here, one that's not being talked about a ton, but I still think could be helpful to some teams out there, and that's Darius Slayton. And I think it would be awesome if he went to the Bills. Like we talked about earlier, how the Bills are missing some just like reliable pass catchers that Josh Allen can count on, and I'm sure they don't want to like go crazy in with a trade or in free agency and try to like spend a ton of money on a receiver just because their offense was good last year and they're trying to build a sustainable winner. And so someone like Slayton, I think, would just be such a perfect fit for them because he's not going to be super expensive, but he is going to be someone who is reliable in general. And like, I think he's just like decent all across the board in terms of like different wide receiver skills. I think he's best at yards after catch, and we saw Josh Allen lower his average depth of target with Joe Brady, as the offense coordinator. And so getting more yak guys in there, I think could be really helpful. And it just like helps the Bills continue to build out their receiver room where, you have Shakir, who's really good. You're hoping Coleman takes a bit of a step this year, and then you have Slayton there to kind of solidify your third receiver option as you kind of figure out what to do with Kincaid there as well. So that would be something that's really interesting to me if the Bills go out and pay him a pretty modest contract of like $7 to $8 million per year over 2 years, and just get him in the building and having Josh Allen, or giving Josh Allen another weapon.
Yeah, and Slayton for years has just been one of those dependable guys who is not talked about a ton, but is still a pretty solid receiver. And I think if you can have him as your wide receiver 3, potentially behind Keon Coleman and behind Khalil Shakir, I think that would make the offense quite a bit better. I also went the receiver route for my final pick, and I think that's going to be Chris Godwin with the Patriots. So the reason I made this pick is because Josh McDaniels is the new offensive coordinator, and he was the offensive coordinator for the Patriots for, it feels like 2 decades at this point, prior to that temporary head coaching job with the Raiders. But he really loves his slot guys. And so, like, historically, it's been Wes Welker, Danny Amendola, Julian Edelman. And I honestly think Chris Godwin historically is probably better than all of those guys. He is coming off of an injury that he had last year. But before that, he was like straight up one of the best receivers in the NFL. I think a lot of that is Liam Cohen's offense, which he kind of was great at using that Cooper Kupp, like maneuver the guy a little bit and get him open that way. But he was 2.36 yards per route run, which is towards the top of the league. He had 33 first down catches, which is really, really good. And to do that in the span of like 6 or 7 games that he played. And then probably the most important stat, he had 0.56 EPA per target, which is every time you are throwing the ball to Chris Godwin, you are adding half a point to your expected points, which I think is really, really impressive. And then just to kind of like add it all together, Drake May, he really needs a guy that he can trust to just consistently get open. And I think that's what Chris Godwin has been great at his time with Tampa. And so contract projection is 3 years, $60 million with about $40 million guaranteed. So it's not like you're really like breaking the bank for a guy like that, but I still think rock solid receiver. I would really like to see him play for the Patriots.
That's an awesome one. Like you mentioned, I would love Drake May to have some real receiving options this year because of the flashes that he showed during his rookie season. And Godwin was just like having such a good year last year, as he usually does. Before his unfortunate injury. So hopefully he can get back to that level again if it's in New England or back in Tampa or somewhere else.
So just to take a snapshot of all of this, what do you think this free agency class may have on the draft implications? I know last year there was like a loaded free agent running back class, and so the running backs didn't go quite as high as everyone was expecting. Do you expect to see kind of the pendulum swing the other way this season?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think like because of the loaded running back class that we have this year, you could see less of the free agent running backs, getting a lot of interest. And I don't know if like the talent in the free agent running back classes is that high anyways, but like I do think like a similar principle might apply for receivers this year, where like there are so many receivers that are either available through requesting a trade or in free agency right now. And so like a lot of teams could just like get their wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 through free agency or through a trade for minimal draft capital, and then just like not draft a receiver like after the first like 20-25 picks this year. And so that's definitely something I'm going to keep an eye out on.
Yeah, I think like the receivers in the draft are solid, but you're right that you are passing up like tangibly solid guys in free agency if you say, oh, we're just going to draft a guy instead, because there's been so many guys that are just consistent that are free agents right now. And so a lot of teams that think they're one piece away can just sign some guy in free agency that they know is going to be solid versus potentially speculating and wasting draft capital on a receiver that may not be so great. And I mean, there's some stats I saw recently that a lot of the receivers that have been taken outside of the first round just have not really worked out that well. And it seems like most of the receiver talent in this year's draft is concentrated towards those middle rounds. And so hopefully we kind of buck that trend by seeing a little bit better receivers in the draft in those middle rounds. But it definitely is a risk for teams that just say, hey, we're going to draft one instead. Then to close things out, are there any major trends that we can expect teams to follow in their pursuit of a Super Bowl caliber roster? So to kind of kick things off, like the trend that we saw everyone talk about was, hey, we need interior pass rush. We need a good defensive line. And that's much easier said than done because either really good pass rushers don't make it to free agency often, or they're outrageously expensive. Do we kind of see other trends aside from just that with the Eagles or with other teams looking to build a Super Bowl caliber roster?
Yeah, if teams are taking a page from the Eagles book, it would definitely be investment in the trenches. Like that's been a staple of the Howie Roseman draft strategy. And so like what I keep coming back to with that is like a team like the Jaguars that's picking at 5 overall. You have Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter off the board, let's say like the two true blue chip players in this draft. And for them to just like want to invest in the trenches, like where you can take Mason Graham, you can take your pick of the offensive lineman between Will Campbell or Armin Membu. I think like they'll tend to look in that direction. Same with the Raiders at pick 6 after them. They'll probably also be looking in a similar direction. Players like Tet McMillan and Ashton Genty might fall a little bit off that principle of just like, we really want to do our meat and potatoes here, and then we'll stock up on skill positions later.
No, I think that's a great breakdown. And yeah, I'm really excited for draft season, because that's whenever you can actually be optimistic about your team and think that you're going to win the Super Bowl. And, only one team out of 32 ends up winning a Super Bowl. But the offseason is just some of my favorite time of year, just because you get to get excited about all of those things. But thank you so much for coming on, Tej. Where can the viewers, listeners find your work?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always super fun coming on. And you can check out my Twitter right now, I guess, is mainly where I'm posting my takes, TEJFB Analytics. Same username on TikTok, where I've started to post a little bit just because we haven't been recording stats and schemes since it's the off season. So yeah, be sure to check me out on those two platforms.
Absolutely. Well, this is Analytics with Asa, and thank you for listening.